bones and then the facial bones. So this is the frontal bone. You have two parietal bones. On the side or lateral side, we have the temporal bone, and then we have the occipital bone back here. For the sutures, you have a coronal suture, sagittal suture, squamosal suture, and back here is the lambdoidal suture. Back here, you're also going to see Wormian bones on this skull and the Wormian sutures, which are sutures within that suture. Back here for the facial bones, we have the nasal bones, maxilla, and the maxilla goes all the way up on both sides of the nasal bones. We have the lacrimal bone, and I know that because that's the lacrimal fossa. Then we have for the orbits, you have the supraorbital margins and the infraorbital margins. Then you have foramen, so you have the supraorbital foramen and the infraorbital foramen, and you have those on both sides. Within the nasal cavity, you have the perpendicular plate. Then down here you have the vomer, and they articulate together to form part of the nasal septum. On the sides you have the middle nasal concha, inferior nasal concha. And now you can't see the superior nasal concha on the ethmoid bone because the nasal bones are covering it. Down here on the maxilla, for the teeth, in order to articulate with the teeth, there are alveolar processes. And there's just going to be little processes between each tooth. If we go towards the side, lateral side here, this is the zygomatic bone. And this is, again, the temporal bone. There's two processes between these bones that form the zygomatic arch. So this whole thing is the zygomatic arch. Here's the suture between those two processes. So on this side, this is the temporal process of the zygomatic bone. And on this side of the suture is the zygomatic process of the temporal bone. Then we're going to see over here, this is the external auditory meatus. This is your mastoid process and the styloid process. If we go towards the posterior side, on the occipital bone, we have the external occipital protuberance. Then we have on this side, so maybe from that view, these are your mastoid processes again, and your styloid processes. Here's the foramen, or the foramen magnum. Okay, the foramen magnum. On both sides of the foramen magnum are the occipital condyles. Superciliary ridge. Back to the frontal bone, you have the supraciliary ridge. And within the orbits, you're going to see a foramen and these fissures. So this is the optic foramen, and then your superior orbital fissure, or supraorbital fissure, and this is your infraorbital fissure. Glabella. Glabella, it's right between the superciliary ridges, so glabella. And down here is the anterior nasal spine.